Hello, and welcome to Google Partners Academy on Air. I'm Margot Werner.
And I'm Vanessa Ginman.
And we work as global product leads for attribution here at Google. We are here today to speak about all things AdWords attribution. So let's take a look at the agenda. First, we're going to take a step back and give some context about why attribution is so important today. Next, we're going to go under the hood of data-driven attribution and explain how we can create a customized attribution model based on the way your customers interact with your brand online. Then Vanessa will outline a recommended approach for choosing a model in the case that data-driven attribution isn't available for all of your conversion types. And she'll then walk through a step-by-step of how you can implement this in your accounts today. Finally, we'll have some time for FAQ before jumping to the live Q&A. So let's get started. First, I want to take a step back and set the context about why we're so excited about attribution today. Since the early days of AdWords conversion tracking, we've seen a complete revolution in the way we access and use the internet. And that revolution stems from the fact that now we can carry around a small computer in our pocket, and that can allow us to start or continue any task online while we're on the go. So we see that now over half of all web traffic comes from mobile and tablet. And so what this means is that the shift for consumer behavior has really big implications for marketing. People are just not using one device or purchasing or booking in one sitting. It's more important that we change our advertising strategies to account for this. So we see that 90% of people switch between screens to complete tasks. And I'm sure if you think of the last thing that you purchased or researched online, you can count the number of screens that you probably switched from as you went through that decision journey. And so that makes it all of the more important to think through and understand how your customers are interacting with your brand throughout their day and as they're changing devices to make these purchase decisions. So taking a step back, we can use an example to think through this user behavior and put it into perspective. So an example I'd like to use is booking a vacation. So if you could just think through with me the last time you booked a hotel or booked a whole vacation. My guess is that you didn't do it all in one big search session, sitting down at your desktop computer on one device.
I booked some flights a couple of weeks ago, and I literally spent probably a week. Every night I researched a little bit more about which flights I wanted to book. So I think that's, very fair.
And now you can do price tracking, which just makes it, stretches out the process even longer.
Exactly.
So more likely, your search journey looked something like this. And I guess if I could interject, I say this is extremely optimistic. This is a very aligned family searching for vacations. When my partner and I were looking at vacations, it took much longer than 1 week. But let's say you have a family that is very good at reaching consensus, and they can do this. They can do this in the space of 1 calendar week. So first, they're searching for something quite broad. They know they want to go to a beach. They're searching for the best tropical vacation. Then maybe they narrow down to a part of the world, a type of hotel experience that they'd like, before understanding a specific property that they're looking for, and finally dates. So for a marketer, in this case, the hotel owner, it's important to understand that these winding consumer paths have implications for how you can best optimize your marketing spend. One thing that not everyone comes to terms with immediately is that whether that you've chosen consciously or not, you are using an attribution model in AdWords today. And that default model is last click. And when we launched conversion tracking several years ago already, this was the best we could offer. But because of this, many advertisers today are only analyzing and taking into account this tiny fraction of that consumer path, which is the final touch point. And so what we want to focus on today is how AdWords attribution can help you connect all of the touch points and value them appropriately, not just that final one.
So let's talk a little bit more about attribution specifically in the AdWords context. And we'll go into, if you're new to attribution, we'll go into kind of what we mean by attribution, what we mean by attribution models, and what this means in the context of AdWords. So let's talk about what you can do to kind of achieve better attribution in AdWords. And we're talking specifically about search click attribution. So just keep that in mind. So really, there are 3 critical steps to kind of getting to attribution. And quite often, I think a lot of advertisers think about attribution as just the attribution piece, but it's really important to put it in context and make sure that all of these other pieces are in place before we talk about attribution. So there's a three-step process, if you like. The first piece is making sure that we're tracking and measuring everything correctly. And this is what we mean by conversion tracking, and we'll talk a little bit more about that. And then we'll spend a lot of time focusing on the attribute piece, which is really about valuing all of the search click touch points kind of along the consumer journey. And we do this by switching attribution models, and we'll deep dive into that. And then what's really crucial to remember is that it's very important to have the measurement piece in place. It's important to have the attribution piece in place. But if you don't take action and optimize towards that better new data, you're not going to get the best value out of attribution. So once we've kind of gone through the attribution piece, just keep in mind that you need to then optimize towards that data in your AdWords account. And we'll talk a little bit about that. So just on the measurement piece, so just to take a step back, attribution is a way of understanding kind of what drove consumers to take action on your website. And so in order to do attribution, you have to track these actions on your website. And we do this through conversion tracking. So conversion tracking helps you understand what desirable actions a consumer took after landing on your website. And AdWords attribution is effectively about changing a setting in AdWords. And we do this at the conversion action level. So if you don't have conversion actions, you can't do attribution. And so this is just something that we like to remind everyone of before we jump into the attribution piece. And the way to do this is by going into AdWords. You can check whether you have conversion tracking enabled. Hopefully you already know whether you do or not, but just if you're new to the account or want to make sure, what you do is you click on the little wrench at the top right-hand side corner in AdWords, and we're talking about the new AdWords experience here. And then under measurement, that you can see on the right-hand side there, you click on conversions. And this will show you a list of all the conversion actions that you have. And you need at least one of those in order to be able to work with attribution. It can be either a conversion action tracked with AdWords conversion tracking or one that you're importing from Google Analytics. So that's the measurement piece. So now if we dive into the attribution part. So let's start with a basic definition. So what do we mean by attribution? An attribution model is the rule or the set of rules that determine how credit from conversions is assigned to different touch points along the conversion path. So in this case, search click touch points in AdWords. So what exactly do we mean by this? Let's take a look at an example. And we're using Margot's highly unrealistic week-long holiday booking.
This is not how I book vacations. I am sorry if you are marketing to me. But a more ideal consumer might book like this.
Yeah, I book alone, so there's no one to have consensus with, but I struggle to reach consensus with myself. So yeah, we'll continue with this example because it's simple. But bear in mind, attribution becomes even more relevant when we have more complex consumer journeys. So as Margot outlined, consumers go through a number of different advertising touch points before converting, and attribution helps you connect these touch points. And so when a consumer actively searches for a holiday and clicks on ads, I think it's reasonable to assume that all of those ads played some kind of role in kind of helping the consumer reach their final decision. So we're kind of agreed that all of these touch points matter. The big attribution challenge is determining how much credit we give to each of these touch points, right? And so you could argue, the first click initiated the purchasing process and therefore is super important. Particularly, these might be consumers who've never heard of your brand. So it's really important to get that first ad up there, first ad impression, and then have consumers click on that, right? So the first click is really important. We can agree on that. Then you could also say, well, the last click is very important because that's kind of what sealed the deal. This was the final click you had before actually booking your holiday and feeling that big sense of relief that it's finally booked. So the last click seems pretty important too. But then there's also a whole bunch of research that happens between the first and the last click. In this instance, only the 2 clicks, but it could be way more. And this, as Margot mentioned, could be, you could be doing it on your work laptop, you could be doing it at home, you could be doing it on your family computer, or you could be doing it on your tablet or mobile. And all of these kind of middle touch points contribute to the consumer decision as well. So I think we can all agree that kind of all of the touch points matter. We just need to determine by how much. And this is where attribution really kicks in. And hopefully at this point you're asking yourself, okay, which touch points are the most important and how do we value the different touch points? So this is where the different attribution models come in. And there are a number of attribution models that marketers can use. And what we want to try and help you through is kind of understanding, okay, what are these different models and how do you choose from them? So in AdWords, there are 6 attribution models. And I look at you to confirm this.
We're not hurting for options. So hopefully we can help you make the decision.
Exactly. And so there are 5 models that are what we call rules-based models. So they're based on, as the title, it's a very intuitive term, rules-based models.
Rely on rules.
Yes, precisely. And so the first one and the most common one is last click. And hopefully, I mean, Margot already mentioned or touched on this a little bit, but the last click is a very limiting model in that it only gives conversion credit to the final click in the purchase process. So we're essentially ignoring everything that happened before the last click. And as we just established in the example that we went through, there are a lot of other touch points that matter as well. The second model is first click. Now, this has a lot of the same challenges as the last click model does, in that it looks only at one click, not at the whole consumer journey. Then we have a bunch of other rules-based models that actually look at all of the touch points along the consumer journey. And so these are the linear, time decay, and position-based models. The linear model distributes conversion credit equally between the different touch points. So if you have 4 touch points, each of them would get 25% of conversion credit, or 0.25 conversions. And I think this is maybe a good moment to mention, to kind of be aware that when we're talking about attribution, we're talking about fractions.
Yeah. And the key thing here is that your fraction credit will always add up to your total sum, right? So let's say we're talking about one conversion. Like Vanessa mentioned, that one conversion on a last click will go to that last touch point. On a first click, we'll go to the first touch point. With linear, even though we're spreading it out, the sum of the parts will still equal 1. And same for time decay or position based. So we're not changing the number of conversions in the account at all.
I've definitely had advertisers ask me, if I see 0.5 conversions in a campaign, does that mean I only sold half a dress?
No,
no, it does not mean that.
All dresses.
full dresses being sold, yeah. So that's the linear model. The time decay model also gives conversion credit to all of the touch points, but does so by kind of over-indexing on the most recent touch points. So this model is kind of working based on the assumption that the closer you get to the purchase decision, the more each of those touch points weigh in on your decision. And then the final rules-based model is the position-based model, which gives more credit to the first and to the last click, and then distributes the remainder of the credit for the kind of in-between touch points. So I think this is it 40% of credit on the first click, 40% of credit on the last click, and then 20% distributed in between. And this is kind of, we spoke a little bit about how the first click and the last click can be considered quite important. We'll talk a little bit more about that later. But this is kind of the philosophy behind the position-based model. And then finally, we have one model that's not a rules-based model. It's what we call the data-driven model, or DDA for short. We like our
favorite acronym.
And this is a model that's dynamic. So it's not based on a specific rule, but rather it looks at the conversion data in your account and the click data in your account to actually determine, okay, what's the incremental value of each of those touch points. And Margot, you will do a little bit of a deep down into how this works in a bit.
Definitely.
Excuse me. So DDA, or data-driven attribution, is definitely the model that we would recommend, provided you have enough conversions on your account. So we need a specific amount of conversions. Confirm here, it's 600 conversions per conversion action.
Yes.
And about 15,000 clicks per account.
Correct.
Yeah.
And in the deep dive, we'll explain why we need those volume thresholds in order to build a meaningful and customized view of how your customers are interacting with your brand. So we need a certain amount of data in order to be able to draw those conclusions. If we don't have that amount, then Vanessa will help you choose between our myriad other rules-based options based on what makes sense for your business.
Yeah. So the thing to take away here is there are a plethora of attribution models to choose from. We'll help you choose the right one. If you do have enough conversion volume, and we'll show you, or we'll tell you how to know whether you have enough conversions as well, then we would always recommend the data-driven model. We already mentioned this, but I think this is really worth highlighting. The last click model, as Margot mentioned, is the only model that's been available. It's been the default for, well, since the dawn of conversion tracking.
Mm-hmm.
And it was really because we weren't really able to track anything other than the last click previously. What's happened now is that we're actually able to get a much fuller picture of the consumer journey. And so the last click has become a little bit of an outdated model in that it gives a very limited view of the consumer journey. And that also means that we're optimizing our campaigns towards this limited view currently. And this is why it's so critical to move away from the last click model that only gives credit to that one touch point.
So Vanessa, I've had many advertisers ask me, and I'm sure you have too, you know, I've built my business using SEM and optimizing to a last click, or it seems to work very well for me now. Why should an advertiser who is having a successful business, who is happy with their search performance, consider moving beyond last click now?
I mean, last click has been a really, really important signal. I mean, conversion tracking in general is an incredibly important signal, and that's what most advertisers are optimizing towards. So a lot of advertisers see good performance under last click. The idea now is that we can actually enhance the data that we're optimizing towards by looking at that full consumer journey. And so I think this is a good segue. Did you know this slide was next?
I did know that. I did know that slide was next. Full disclosure, I cheated.
So thanks to giving this better understanding of the whole consumer journey, moving away from last click, on average, what we see is that it actually increases the number of conversions you get for the same cost per conversion. So essentially, you might have been doing advertising for a long time with Google search and you're seeing good performance. Essentially, this is a way of making your performance that bit more efficient, which means on average, when you switch away from the last click attribution model, you should be able to see more conversions for the same cost per conversion.
And we like to talk about this as another optimization best practice that you can apply to your accounts, particularly to more accurately value things earlier in the decision journey that might be helpful in generating additional volume at an efficient cost. And that's how we see overall that advertisers do generate additional conversion volume at that efficient, similar cost per conversion.
So we went through these models. So just a quick recap, these are the models that we have to work with. And if you can choose the data-driven, that's the one we would recommend. And so Margot will now talk you through what the data-driven model actually is.
Awesome. So data-driven attribution, apart from being sort of a mouthful, doesn't exactly tell you the nuts and bolts of how it works or what it is incorporating when we evaluate how much fractional credit to give. So I want to take some time to really go under the hood and talk about what we mean exactly when we say data-driven attribution and why Vanessa and I think it's so much more valuable and flexible than our rules-based option.
We should have mentioned at the start, attribution is our favorite topic. So you're in luck that we have a limited time because we can talk about this for a long time.
In fact, we do spend a lot of time talking about this, and we are very cool. So just we'll leave it at that.
Putting that out there.
So data-driven attribution is an enhancement over rules-based models because of for several reasons. One is that regardless of your business or your vertical, the way users typically interact with your brand, a rules-based model is going to apply that same rule to every single consumer journey, and not account for any change that you might have in marketing strategy, in seasonality, or nuances to a particular geo or device type that you might be targeting. Data-driven attribution uses the data in your accounts to fractionally attribute credit based on the actual contribution of each keyword by comparing converting and non-converting paths, and learns and adjusts over time using Google's machine learning. Like I said, and we'll go into a little more detail on the next slide, you can imagine that we need a significant amount of path data to be able to determine what is really meaningful in terms of a signal for your account. And so for this reason, we require at least 600 conversions at the conversion type level. So that could be a sale or a lead or a sign up, whatever you may be tracking on your website, and 15,000 Google.com search clicks over the last 30 days in order to be able to build this fully custom model for you.
And is that search clicks only or search and shopping as well?
Oh, that is search and shopping. Thanks, Vanessa, for pointing that out. So this works for all of your search clicks. We can talk a little bit in more detail, but it is important to note that if you're doing any display advertising, that will continue to be reported on a last click basis. This is strictly a search optimization.
Yeah, so nothing changes for last click, essentially.
Nothing will
sorry,
change.
for display.
Nothing will change for your display, for any display marketing that you may be doing.
Okay.
So I think it's easiest to talk through this through an example.
This our classic example has just got even shorter. Someone booked the holiday in 3 days.
Someone is being very efficient with their time. So I love using an example, and I guess particularly this example today.
Seems to be your favorite.
To talk through how we calculate that fractional credit for each touch point that a customer might have with your brand online. So we'll look back over the conversion window for your account. Most accounts are set to 30 days. And we'll take one specific path. And we'll evaluate the conversion rate for every journey that has passed through that specific path over the 30 days. So let's say we've had, X users out of 100, or in this case, 3 users out of 100 who have converted using these specific touch points over the past 30 days. And that means that this specific path has a 3% conversion rate.
And these are all specific search clicks, ad clicks.
They are specific search ad clicks. So each one of these will result in a visit to the website. So what we'll then do is we'll take a nearly identical, but not quite path, and we will calculate that conversion rate for the similar path. So in this case, there is one single differentiating step, that more upper funnel best tropical vacations touch point. And we see actually that for the shorter but similar path, that we only see a 2% conversion rate over the same time period. And we can use this to calculate the incremental impact of that differentiating step. So you can imagine that depending on the size of your accounts, we may be evaluating tens of thousands or even more of these paths over a particular period. So it's really thanks to the power of really Google's machine learning that we're able to generate these models for all of our customers on a daily basis. You can also see why we require a certain level of data to be able to isolate these differentiating steps and calculate meaningful incremental impact. So hopefully that gives you some insight into how we calculate the model and why we do unfortunately require that threshold in terms of quantity of data.
And in terms of the quantity, so 600 conversions and 15,000 clicks, is that over a specific period of time?
Yes, over a 30-day window.
Okay.
So an easy way to check this is just by clicking the wrench icon in the AdWords front end and going down to conversions, setting your date range to the last 30 days, and you can see very easily in the all conversions column which of your conversion actions meet that threshold.
Perfect. So how do we actually, so Margot talked at length about the data-driven attribution model, and as we said, this is absolutely the model that we recommend if you have enough data. If you don't have enough data for the data-driven attribution model, don't fear. We have solutions for you. So this is really why we've created a number of the great rules-based models that you can choose from in a sort of instead of last click. And so here's a recap of the rules-based models. And for these ones, there are no conversion volume requirements. So you can work with these even if you have one conversion. We're obviously hoping you have more than one conversion. And as alluded to earlier, it's really important to choose the right model for your business. And for this, we would usually kind of set first click and last click to one side, because there are very few cases, I would argue pretty much none, where we would recommend last click or first click, just because of what we said earlier in that they only look at one touch point along the consumer journey. So then we're left with the linear, the time decay, and the position-based models. So these are really the ones that you should be evaluating and seeing, okay, which one is the right one for your business. And there is kind of a simple rule that we like to...
A rule for rules-based models?
We have a rule for choosing between rules-based models.
This slide is all about rules.
And so really what you want to be thinking about is, okay, what are your business goals? Is your goal, are you a very growth-oriented business? In which case, you're probably looking to get a lot of new customers onto your site. And in this case, you might want to choose the position-based model, as it over-indexes on that first click, which is really important for capturing new consumers. If you're kind of more, and this is also good if you're new on a market, so you're entering a new market and you want to kind of gain a little bit of market share in that new region, we'd also recommend the position-based. The time decay model is better if you maybe are a little bit more established in the market and you have a solid base of customers. You're maybe not looking for a lot of new customers, but you're looking to convert those existing customers. And in that case, we would recommend the time decay. The linear model is a little bit more of a neutral model between the time decay and the position base. So we would always favor the time decay or position-based models. But the linear, as we said, kind of distributes credit equally, so you don't have to take as much of a stance as to whether you're growth-oriented or more conservative with your growth strategy. Does that make sense?
That makes sense to me.
That makes sense. Excellent. Let's hope it makes sense to everyone who's listening as well.
I've heard that several times, so more than once. So
you're biased.
Let us know if you have questions on this slide.
Perfect. And so how do we actually do this? And it really is very simple to change your attribution model.
I wish I could say it was one click. It's more like 2 clicks.
It's more like 2 clicks, but in terms of minutes, I would say maybe 2? Max 2 minutes.
So you can do this today.
I once spoke to an advertiser, or I got an email from an advertiser, and they said, okay, can we do a hangout, a meeting to actually talk through the implementation? And I kind of felt a little bit awkward because I was like, yeah, we can do a meeting, but the meeting will last about a minute and a half.
Very efficient.
Yeah, very efficient. So we'll now take you through the implementation steps of how to actually change your attribution model in AdWords. So hopefully you've already switched to the new AdWords interface.
I have. Hopefully you have too.
Yeah.
It's very great. Much faster.
Much faster. And so in that interface, you will find a wrench at the top right-hand side corner. And there under measurements, you would navigate to conversions. So the first item on the menu, and click on that. And this will take you to a list of all your conversion actions. Now, you might have one, you might have several. It's really important that you kind of, first and foremost, change the attribution model for the conversion action that you have included in the conversions column. So this is the conversion action that you're currently optimizing towards. So in this instance, I can't even say what this, view another post. So this is
website conversion action.
A website conversion action. So here you would choose which conversion actions you would want to change your attribution model for. We suggest doing it for all of the conversion actions that you're actively using. What's important to keep in mind is that changing the attribution model isn't available for all conversion actions. So it's available for the most common ones. So if you have a purchase on website or some kind of action on the website, or you're importing goals from Google Analytics, you're able to change your attribution model.
Or calls conversions would be the other one I would add. Some of you might have calls conversions, and this is also able to be changed for those as well.
Exactly. So there are a couple of ones where you can't change them. As an example, I would give store visits. If you're using store visits, you can't change the attribution model yet. But for all the ones where you can, which is most of them, we would recommend making this change. So you do this by clicking on the relevant conversion action. which will take you to kind of all the conversion action settings. And there you can click on Edit Settings. And Edit Settings will allow you to go into the Attribution Model section, which currently most likely says Last Click. And when you click there, you'll get a drop-down menu of all the models that we just talked about that you can choose from. And so this is what the drop-down menu looks like. And here, the data-driven model is available. We'll show you what it looks like when it's not available.
It's also right on top, so you don't forget that we recommended it.
You don't forget that this is...
You don't have to go too far.
Exactly. But you can also choose from the other ones that we mentioned, and the other ones will always be available. So if the data-driven one isn't available, you can choose from those. And I think on the next slide, we have an example of an account where data-driven attribution isn't available. You'll see a small yellow triangle that alerts you to the fact that it's not available. If your conversion action is new, right, or if you're new to AdWords, then you might need to wait for a couple of months until you've gathered enough conversion data. And then you could come back to these settings and see, OK, maybe the data-driven model is now available, and then you can select it later on. Absolutely. So there's no problem. And if you don't have the data-driven model available, you can select, for example, the time decay model for now. And then a few months from now, if your business is growing, which we obviously hope it is, you might be able to come back and switch to the data-driven attribution model. And then don't forget to click Save and Done, and that will save your settings. And that is how easy it is. And it'll be a lot quicker when I'm not voice-overing your motions.
Yes, you can make these clicks faster, especially with the new AdWords experience, which loads so quickly.
So much faster.
And another thing to note is that as soon as you click Save and Done, this data will automatically flow into your conversions column, and there's no additional adjustment on your part. This is how simple it can be.
Exactly. Yeah. And this that point takes me back to what we mentioned earlier, is that it's very important to act on this data. And the way to act on this data is, because this data is now in your conversions column, provided the conversion action is in your conversions column, whenever you start making optimization decisions from now onwards, you will automatically be taking into account the new attribution model data. Perfect.
So now that we have, thanks to Vanessa, a really solid understanding of all of the attribution model options that you have available to you in AdWords, and a deep understanding of our recommended model, the data-driven attribution model, let's talk about a few FAQs before we hop to the Q&A section.
So if you haven't put in your questions yet, feel free to do so, and we'll get to them in a couple of minutes.
Awesome.
So one of the questions that we often get is, OK, I changed my attribution model, and then I went into my AdWords campaign reports, and if I look at the most recent days, I actually see my conversions going down. Does this mean the attribution model isn't working for me? Should I change back to last click? What does this mean?
Yeah, this is a really common question, and it can be disconcerting for advertisers who make the switch without sort of hearing this FAQ up front. So it's a good thing that we have some time to address it today. Attribution models bring into sharp relief the concept of time lag. So as you may be aware, AdWords front-end reporting reports conversions based on the time of the click, not the time of conversion. So let's say Vanessa was shopping for a new handbag last week and clicks on an ad.
How did you know?
I suspected. But she didn't actually purchase the handbag until today. Starting today, we would see a conversion appear in that advertiser's account for last week. But if they had looked at the reporting sometime in the intermediate days, they wouldn't see that conversion appear yet. So this is a factor on a last click model, of course, but when we move to a non-last click model, we assign credit to clicks that happen farther and farther back in the past, right? So let's say Vanessa had done an extensive amount of shopping for her handbag over the past month. Perhaps that advertiser would see even more credit thrown back to sometime even in April. And had they looked at their conversions prior to her conversion of today, they might have seen a smaller number. So we have a chart on the next slide that illustrates this, because this can be sometimes a confusing concept. So when you have long conversion paths, this is really when this comes into play. You might be a brand that for now is optimizing or investing primarily in your brand terms, or primarily in things lower in the funnel, and you might not see this come into play except for on the very most recent days. So what I typically recommend to advertisers is to take a look at your average time lag and make sure you ignore the most recent days when looking at your performance in AdWords to allow time for those conversions to happen. This is fundamentally user behavior, right? You have me taking a month to book my vacation and Vanessa taking a month to buy her handbag. So you might even have better consumers who make decisions more quickly. But fundamentally, the lagging consumer behavior is something that we all need to keep in mind as we move into a world with more advanced measurement where we can evaluate and attribute to all of those touch points.
Yeah. And so just to make sure I understand correctly, so for example, if I'm an advertiser and I look at the last week, so up until today, I don't even know what day it is today, Thursday maybe. So I look at the past week and I see that my conversions have gone down a little bit from the previous week.
Yes.
Then what I would want to do is wait for another week before I look at this past week.
Exactly. So incorporate some sort of delay into your final reporting, and you can evaluate up to, I would say, like 7 days is a healthy benchmark. So I would start looking at last week's data today, for example.
So if I want to report for April, now is probably a good time to do it because we're about a week into May.
Exactly.
Okay, gotcha. And what about advertisers who are in the habit of updating their bids multiple times a day? If you're talking about this time lag, how does that impact the bidding aspect of it?
Yeah, this is, well, we had some knowledge in putting the deck together, but I will tell all of you that these questions frequently come hand in hand because
it's not a coincidence that the questions are in the deck.
It's no coincidence at all. So given that, I've just suggested that you wait as long as a week to evaluate your performance to allow those conversions to trickle in. This can cause some concern among marketers who are used to changing their bids very, very frequently. And so what I would recommend really to all marketers is that you not make decisions based on incomplete data. So the data for today in your account, fundamentally, unless you assume that for all users, all of your users or all of your customers can make decisions within a 24-hour period from clicking on the ad, that data is inherently incomplete. So this does not mean that if you think there are meaningful segments by time of day that you can't adjust your bids. I would just recommend you look, say, last week Thursday to understand whether 9 o'clock in the morning is a peak time for traffic for you, or 5 o'clock in the evening. If you have a seasonal period, like Mother's Day is coming up, you might consider looking at your time of day segmentation for last year to inform your intraday bids. Because fundamentally that data for today, whether you're looking at last click, if you decide to remain on last click, or data-driven, is still incomplete. So I would suggest there's a better way to get a more holistic view of your intraday data.
Perfect. You just made me panic there because I'd completely forgotten about Mother's Day.
Well, a reminder to Vanessa and all of you watching.
Mother's Day coming up in certain parts of the world, because it's a different day in different parts of the world. So.
Yeah, here in the States, moms are important.
Check in with a mother and don't
forget them.
Excellent. Another thing that I know that a lot of advertisers are wondering about is, okay, this sounds really interesting, and a lot of advertisers often ask me, okay, can I test this maybe on a few campaigns? Is that possible?
Unfortunately, no. The reason for many things in AdWords, we do offer some form of testing on a portion of the account. But the challenge with attribution is that fundamentally we build a data-driven model, or we calculate attribution credit based on interactions across your entire account. So let's say you have Vanessa's handbag maker has a brand campaign.
Don't tell my manager I'm doing so much handbag research.
for best handbags, for example, and or has a generic campaign, I should say, with terms like best handbags, and then has a lower funnel brand campaign with a specific make and their brand term. It's quite common, or we would expect that users interact with both of those campaigns along their path to conversion. So if we were to opt in just one of those to a test, we wouldn't see any benefit from changing attribution models. So this really is a holistic change that you need to make across your whole account.
Right. I mean, that's the whole value proposition, is that we're doing it across the whole consumer journey. So if we start splitting it up, the value proposition kind of disappears.
It does dissipate. And I understand how this can be concerning. It does feel a bit like jumping into the water, but something that I think might be reassuring for some advertisers is that even if your paths to conversion are very short. Let's say for now, you're only investing in your brand terms, and on average, users only click on one ad before converting. Well, if you switch to a linear model or a data-driven model, your conversion credit won't change. If there's not a longer path to conversion, we have nowhere to allocate that credit to, and your conversions will look identical on a non-last click model as they do on a last click model. And that is the absolute worst case scenario, that nothing will change. If you have longer conversion paths, if you've had the opportunity to expand your campaigns and your reach, what you will see is a more accurate representation of credit for the money that you're choosing to invest on those more broad or upper funnel demand generating terms.
Yeah, that's really interesting. And I think on that note, I think it's really important to mention that I think as we all know that with last click, brand terms tend to get quite a lot of credit. And as you said, generic, so non-brand terms tend to get much less credit because of the nature of last click. And so we might have tested some generic keywords, let's say 2 years ago, and concluded that they don't really work. And so we removed them from our account and forgotten about them. And so this is kind of part of the part of taking action on attribution is, yes, we need to optimize towards the new, better data. But we also want to make sure that we look at all these generic keywords that we might have tested at some point in the past, concluded that they do not work. Actually, now that we have the data-driven model or another non-last click model, we get much better data on which keywords are really working and which ones are not. And so it's really worth it kind of introducing new keywords into the account once you've changed the model to test out which keywords do work for you.
That's a really important connection. And I would say that's where the testing comes in for attribution. It's not just in like doing those few clicks that Vanessa walked us through. It's actually in leveraging that data and acting on it, whether it's retrying generics for your account that haven't worked in the past, or investing in mobile if it hasn't looked like it's converting for you. It's interesting on for each marketer individually to see what this means for their business.
Yeah, precisely. Excellent. Thanks for taking us through some of those. Now I think we will jump to the questions.
Let's take a look. So it looks like we have a few questions coming in, and so we'll switch over. As a reminder, you can submit questions via the live chat box. So let's take a look. So I think we had a chance to cover this, but let's restate. Vanessa, is this for search clicks only, or does this work for display?
So AdWords attribution currently works for search and shopping clicks only, so it does not touch display. And this is kind of good if you're working on search, but you have maybe colleagues or someone in your organization working on display. They might come to you and ask, okay, what impact, if we change the model, what impact does that have on my display campaigns? The very short answer is none. So if display is the last click, it will still get all the credit. If display isn't the last click, then it won't get any credit, but it wasn't getting any credit before, so nothing changes.
Good to know, particularly for those of us who work heavily with the display side of the house.
Yeah.
So maybe we can jump. When you select a new attribution model to measure from search, is it best practice to begin a new campaign when selecting, say, for example, default is last click or time decay or position based?
So this is a really good question. So I think if I'm understanding it correctly, it's important to highlight that the attribution model change is done at the conversion action level, which means it's done at the account level. So this is kind of independent of campaigns. So you don't need to create any new campaigns when you change your attribution model. So you would work with the campaigns that you have. And then, as we said, you could always expand kind of keywords under that campaign, and you do kind of optimization like you usually do. But you definitely don't need to create any new campaigns when you switch the attribution model.
Awesome.
Is there anything you'd add to that?
Just that you only need to change this once. This is a conversion level setting, and you can sort of set it and forget it. There's no need when you're creating new campaigns to make sure that they're under that new attribution model. As long as they're under your own account, everything will follow as expected.
Cool. So we have a question from Susan. I have a client who is used to seeing all last click conversions. If I use a different model, they will see the number of conversions for AdWords go down. What's the best way to explain this change?
So I love this question. Thank you, Susan, for bringing it up.
Good question.
I think there are two parts that I'd like to address. The first one is the absolute number of conversions for AdWords. Although there's a delay for conversions to come in when you're an additional delay for conversions to come in when you're using a non-last click attribution model, the absolute number of conversions in AdWords are totally the same. So if we were to look at last month's conversions on a last click model and last month's conversions on a data-driven model, the number of conversions for each campaign individually might vary, but if we were to sum them all up in the bottom of a spreadsheet, the totals would be identical. So that, I think, is very key to highlight to your client, that we're not giving any extra credit to AdWords, we're not taking any credit away from AdWords, we are simply more properly assigning credit to the divisions within our AdWords accounts so that we can generate additional volume. And the second piece that I would highlight is if there's a report, let's say, that you're giving to your client on Friday for the week preceding, it might be a good time to set expectations that perhaps on Fridays you would give her a report for the week prior. Or that you could continue to give her that report on Friday, but you would give her a final report for the following week. Just something that would allow the total volume of conversions to flow in as expected.
Perfect.
Cross-device?
Yes. So are cross-device conversions still unable to be applied to conversions imported from Google Analytics?
This is a good question, and thank you for asking it. Yes, unfortunately, while you can apply a non-last click attribution model to any goal or transaction that you import from Google Analytics to AdWords, the only cross-device behavior that we'll be able to take into account is when there is, in fact, a touch point on another device. So let's say Vanessa clicked on an ad on mobile and then clicked on a desktop ad and then went to the website and converted, and that is imported to AdWords as a Google Analytics goal. We will be able to assign credit to both of those touch points, but cross-device conversions in the way we talk about them in AdWords, where there's no ad click on the converting device, those are still not measured by GA goals that are imported, even if you switch to a non-last click attribution model.
That makes sense. And maybe on the note of Google Analytics, we had a question come in around, does DDA require connecting the AdWords account to a Google Analytics account?
It does not. That's a good question. So this attribution solution we can think of as a search optimization, and it takes place fully in the realm of your search accounts. So there's really no additional setup that you need, and the implementation is just as simple as what Vanessa walked us through here.
Excellent.
So next up, we have, this is an excellent question. Is historical conversion data in the account retroactively changed when an attribution model is changed? Or is that conversion data only changed from the point when the model is changed?
That is a very good question, and something we didn't have time to touch upon in the main presentation. So historical conversion data is not retroactively changed in the conversion column when we change the model. So let's say you have one conversion action and you have included that one in the conversions column. And let's say you change the model today on Thursday. If you look at historical data, so last Thursday, for example, that will still be last click data. So it's only changing the conversions column from the date of model change going forward, so from today onwards. There is, however, a way to see kind of what historical data would look like restated under your new model. And this is a different set of conversion columns that exist in AdWords. So just like you can add different columns to your reporting, like clicks, impressions, you can add different columns that are under the heading of attribution in the AdWords interface. And there you can find, for example, a column called conversions current model. And my colleagues laugh at me because I think this is actually very intuitively named because it states your conversions under your current model. So for example, if you've changed the model to data-driven, what you can do is you can add the conversions current model column in AdWords, and you can actually see what your conversions historically looked like under the data-driven model. And this goes back almost 2 years, I think, the data.
Yeah, you should be. The purpose of this column is really to enable you to do a year-on-year analysis and compare apples to apples. So I am sorry that we didn't have time to cover this in the main section, but I think there's a AdWords Help Center link in the description in the live stream, and you can read more about the current model columns and how to add them and some screenshots of what this looks like in the AdWords front end. So hopefully that will be helpful in getting you started.
Definitely. So would it be correct to say that the main advantage of position-based attribution is to allow you to identify more valuable keywords and ad groups than you would with first or last click? I think that's fair to say.
That is fair to say.
It's a very good summary from David on the value in changing away from last click.
Definitely. And a way you can think about this is that you may have keywords or ad groups that tend to not get any credit under a last click model, but they're in your account likely because you have some hypothesis that this is important for your brand to show up on these types of queries. What a position-based or linear model can help do is confirm if that gut feel is correct and assign a more appropriate value to these things that are driving value, that do play a role in driving conversions. We just can't see it today. And so from our experience, this has helped advertisers to really grow the volume of conversions that they're seeing and pay the right amount for them.
So I think we have time for maybe one more question. There's one from Jeff around what is the value of last click versus data-driven attribution for an e-commerce site where the only conversion is a checkout, so presumably a purchase of an item.
Sure. Thanks, Jeff, for this. I think this is a really common case, so glad we're bringing it up. I think let's take the example of Vanessa's handbag e-commerce site. Sorry, Vanessa.
Never gets old.
By the end of this,
there's going to be hundreds of people around the world thinking that all I do is shop for handbags.
No, let's be clear. We're talking about one handbag. Otherwise, by the end of the show, Vanessa would have 12 handbags.
And I'll be broke as well.
So depending on the item that you're shopping for, you can envision that the decision process might be quite long. Perhaps you have something the user or the customer has something quite specific in mind that they're looking for. If it's a gift, they want to evaluate a number of options, and there are probably a good number of searches that the customer would do before actually clicking on that ad that leads directly to the checkout. And so what I would say to a retailer is that it's important to get the name of your brand and the products you offer out there earlier in the decision journey. Perhaps you've tested, like Vanessa said, generics in the past or more upper funnel terms in the past, and they haven't performed. What this would allow you to do is to try again and see if that has a positive impact on the volume you see. Again, if you are selling a product that is just very low consideration, like a toothbrush, I don't know where this is coming from.
I do a lot of research before I buy my
Vanessa researches her toothbrushes. I do not research my toothbrush. In the worst case scenario, if there really is only one ad click before that toothbrush purchase, data-driven attribution won't reassign any credit. It will be identical to a last click model because there was only one click, and so there's nowhere else to assign the credit. So I would say from an e-commerce perspective, there's only an upside here. And if you do truly have short conversion paths, then there will be no harm done.
Yeah, and I mean, sometimes, I think you said that already, but sometimes you might think you have a short conversion path, but actually switching away from last click will show you otherwise and see that there might be worth investing kind of more in the upper funnel.
Definitely. So we hope that this conversation on updating attribution models has highlighted hopefully an area of opportunity for you and your businesses. And as always, we encourage you to keep the discussion going on the Google Partners community. We'll see you online.
See ya.